Hey there. Welcome to History Chats. Um, Another pre-shot video here so that we could show you some stuff down in the exhibit space. This is our newest exhibit, Peek Inside. And this is a little behind the scenes, or peek inside, peek inside. This exhibit, if you've not seen it before, is all about the stuff that we've collected over the years as a museum. Some of this stuff, we pull out occasionally for exhibits and programs, and some of it just doesn't lend itself, but it's really cool. And so, we put it. Why not make an exhibit that is just some cool stuff? And I want to talk about some of that stuff today. So, specifically, we're standing here so that we can talk about this guy. That's Sir Seven, suit of armor. Maybe that means something to you if you remember Sir Seven. Maybe it's just a suit of armor. That's pretty cool too. It's one of those cool objects that it doesn't necessarily need to have the context. It could just be a suit of armor, and that's pretty awesome. And so we wanted to put that in here. When we were contemplating, what is going to be in the exhibit, what kind of things do we want to make sure get in here, there's a handful of objects that we've had over the years that people remember, and they might say, hey, where is that? Do you still have that? And Sir Seven is definitely one of those. And we wanted to make sure that we, make sure to figure out where to put them. And so we thought this would be a great place to start with. So who's Sir Seven, and why is the suit of armor here? Interesting story. So back in the 1950s, the radio station here in town, one of the radio stations, WSAU, expands to television programming. So in 1952, there was allocated the frequency to have a station here in Wausau, and Channel 7 is born. It takes, I think, a year or two before they end up getting it on the air for the first time. So, they get the license, and then they had to get the equipment and everything. Newspaper records at the time said, don't rush out and buy a television set yet. It'll maybe be a little bit of time. But by 1954, it had definitely become time, and people were watching broadcasts from here in Wausau. Now, they were broadcasting out of, the studios were located in, technically the broadcast went from, another facility. But the studios were shot primarily in the building that is known as Plummer Mansion. Or Plummer Castle, as some people have said. It's a great little building. It's a pretty big building. No longer in existence. It got torn down in the 1970s. But for about 20 years, it was used, maybe 20 years, something like that, for the television studios here. Now it is, was originally built by the Plumbers. Mary Jane and Daniel Plummer, leading citizens of the community here, and they, built this pretty big building, this amazing building. The granite, the brick, it was quite the building. And after they passed, it was repurposed as the studio for WSAU and television in the 1950s. So because of that, they wanted to, hired some people to try to figure out like a brand. I don't think they would have called it a brand necessarily at this point. It's not like today where branding is really important, but they didn't want an identity, right? And so because it was in a castle, as people might have seen, because of the architecture, so people called it a castle, and so, hey, let's make a knight. And so that was the birth of Sir Seven. The original artwork and the design for Sir Seven was by local artist Sid Kyler. Great visual artist. He did a lot of great stuff. And he also, jazz musician and, interesting part of the community for sure. And so he contributed this design, which is a knight with that sort of squat helmet, very much of its time in the 1950s for sure. And this became the mascot, essentially, the logo, the representation for Channel 7, the television station here in Wausau. So they used this for a variety of things. So Sid Kyler would make these cards, and then they would put them up onto the camera, in front of the camera, and that would, here's the picture. And these might be, happy holidays. They might be, hey, here's what's coming up. Maybe just an identifier of saying you're watching Channel 7, WSAU TV, and that is what they ended up doing. And so there's this identity that is very much attached to the Sir 7. Now, by the end of the 1960s, they decided to build a new studio, and they outgrown the Plummer Mansion, and so they went into their facilities on Grand Avenue, and they continued to keep, Sir 7 around for an extent. And this is actually kind of where this guy shows up. So this is a suit of armor. It's obviously not one-to-one with Sid Keiler's design. This is a situation where we don't exactly know the explicit origins of where this item came from. Whoever created it, we're pretty sure that this is more of a costuming thing than anything else. This is obviously not a suit of armor that you would take into battle. This is not something from medieval Europe or anything like that where they had the heavily armored soldiers. And in fact, it is, from what I understand, not a fun thing to wear. I know we have secondhand account I've heard of one of the people who got to wear the suit of armor to film some interstitials. By this point, they weren't just doing cards; they were doing motion video, and so somebody had to put on the someone that was tall enough and skinny enough could fit into the armor, and then they filmed them taking a step and swinging the sword, which by the way is massive. The sword is very heavy, and not something that was it's not the most balanced thing, right? And apparently it was a situation where you take 2 steps and swing the sword, and then they had to cut quick and then grab them because otherwise he would topple over. Again, it's not designed for mobility in the way that actual suits of armor. I mean, there's a reason that suits of armor were really expensive and sought after, because they weren't just something that would save your life in battle. They were designed to actually be mobile, and this is not that. This is a bit of costuming. And yeah, it gets the job done for what it needs to do. Now, Sir 7, there is this, which is on a mannequin, or actually I don't think it's on a mannequin. I think it's just a framework holding it up at this point. I think it's been soldered in place so that the arms aren't going to go anywhere and all that sort of thing. They also had a version of this which would have been used for public appearances, which is a lot more mobile. So, for example, this is from 1983 at the parade for the Wassa celebration. They had a pickup truck, and they had Sir 7 waving from the back. And this is some similarities. The helmet might be the same. Pretty much everything else is different. A little bit more mobile, a little bit stripped down. It's not quite so, his legs are a lot more free to move around. So there was at least 2-ish suits of armor that were used as well. So you might be wondering, hey, why is this here then? Well, Sir 7, throughout the 1970s, they had moved out of the Plummer Mansion, or the castle, into their facilities on the Grand Avenue, and that worked really well. And they continued to use Sir 7 as part of the branding, but at a certain point they decided they didn't really need, or maybe want, the full suit of armor sitting around. What are you going to do with it? And so they decided to donate it to us. This is a situation, again, where we don't really have a firm understanding. It just kind of showed up. The people that were around at the time didn't document it or didn't remember. I'm not sure. I didn't look into it specifically that deep, but I know that there's some question. Sometimes that happens. Something's been around long enough. We don't always have a intricate record. Certainly, if this was brought in today or in the last 20, 25 years, we would definitely have better paper trail to know, hey, where did this come from? And hey, why was it created, and all that sort of stuff. That's something we like to have when we get donations. But regardless, it ends up at the Historical Society in the 90s, maybe late 80s. Again, hard to know. I was certainly not there here at this point to be able to tell for sure. But yeah, it was sitting there. They had it up on the landing, up the stairs, because hey, we had limited space back then too, and so it worked out. But it did mean that many people got to see it. Generations, for a while, people would walk past it, and it was one of those memorable things. Now, of course, everything got moved over when we renovated the Yawkey House and got the Woodson History Center here. This is where our objects are housed now. Most of the time, this is back in storage, but every once in a while we bring it out. A great example of an object that, there's a lot of excitement around. People, whether you know of Sir 7 because you grew up watching Channel 7 or because it's a suit of armor, you don't have to know the context to think that's pretty cool. It still is a pretty cool piece of artwork, I guess. I would hesitate. Costuming, it's a cool object. And so we decided, again, there's a couple items in our collection that people ask about, and this is definitely one of them. And whenever we get a chance to pull it out, we do. And it makes for a great entryway starting point to the exhibit. So that's the exhibit, one of the objects that make it into the exhibit. So that's one of the things that made it into the exhibit, because there's a public understanding and, hey, this is pretty cool. I want to talk about another one. And this one did not make it into the exhibit, but there's a very good reason for that. And for this, we need to go back into collections where this guy usually is. Yeah. Okay. Let's do here. All right. So this is where the second object that we're talking about today is. Might not be obvious which one I'm talking about. We've got a bunch of stuff here. This is part of our artifact storage area. Not everything fits nicely on a shelf or in a cabinet or things like that. Sometimes got to fit on the floor, and sometimes they're too heavy to put up on, up above. So, some of it gets a little crowded. We don't necessarily have the best, most expansive space, so we make things fit where they can. So the object we're talking about is actually right here. We're going to move some stuff and reveal it, and we'll talk more about it in a second. All right, so here we are. This is Marchetti's cannon, or at least what we call Marchetti's cannon. Good, still recording. This is one of these items that you might have seen if you've been around Wausau for a number of years. We used to bring it out on a number of occasions. It's got an interesting history. So when I say it's Marchetti's cannon, specifically this is Marchetti's cannon. The chassis, the carriage, the wheels, that's separate. We'll get to how that comes to be in a second. The cannon itself is interesting in that we don't entirely know where it came from. There are a bunch of stories that I've heard. This is, I think, early 2000s. We had a little exhibit where we had shown this back when we were at the Yawkey House. So someone put this together with some of the research, although I can't quite find, I think a lot of this is like stories that have passed down, but the story goes, it's not an actual cannon. It's not that Marchetti acquired a cannon used in the Civil War or, for military purposes. In fact, if we look at the cannon itself, it's pretty clear it's not a military issue anything. It doesn't have the markings or the things that you'd expect and you would have to have if it was a military cannon. Instead, it's suggested that actually it was produced perhaps at the behest of Marchetti himself, by the foundry at Murray Manufacturing, which makes sense. They did a lot of interesting things. They weren't just making equipment for paper companies, which is their main thing. They often would make an anchor or a grate for a grill or something like that. So yeah, they'd probably be the ones to do it. Now, why that happened, it's said to have been done about turn of the century. My addition to the collective lore here is that perhaps it was for the Spanish-American War. Back in 1898, we know this because Louis Marchetti himself wrote a pretty good explanation in his book. In 1898, war with Spain happened. So the United States, Spain, Spanish-American War. And as part of that, Company G, of the 3rd Regiment of the Wisconsin National Guard. Local boys here, they went off and took part in the conflict. They didn't see any fighting. They went down to Puerto Rico and were sort of part of the occupation force for a couple months, and then they came back. But upon the return, Marchetti and many other people here gave them a tremendous, reception when they came back. And he says that when their train came in, they were greeted by the firing of cannons. And I would bet that would kind of all track that, hey, he says we need to welcome these guys back with some cannons. That'd be cool, very significant, and thematically appropriate. So he goes to Murray and says, hey, could you make me a signal cannon? And so here it is. So this was not designed to shoot a cannonball or anything. This is just, designed to make the sound of a cannon going off. So that might be. We don't really know how it gets from that point to being found in 1925. In 1935, there were some teenagers. It was a summer day. Clifford Erdman and, let's see here. Lost my shot here. Clifford Erdman and Jim Novak was the other guy. Some friends, they were going to a movie in downtown Wausau. On their way home, they cut through, what turned out to be Marchetti's property. Kind of near the river, this sort of swampy area there, and they found a cannon. And they were, oh, this is very cool. So they scrambled to hide it, I guess. They didn't want anybody else stealing it first. So they put cattails over it and concealed it. And they came back with a wagon, somehow got it up onto the wagon and took it back to Clifford's house, Erdman house, where apparently he then created a chassis for it so that they could move it around. At some point, his father decided, maybe we don't need a cannon on the lawn or backyard here, so let's give it to the public library, which is what they did. So the public library had it for a few years. Unclear exactly when that happens, but eventually, in the 50s, Historical Society gets created. The library has a whole bunch of objects that have been accumulated of history value. Let's give it to the Historical Society. So the museum gets a cannon. I'm assuming. We don't know specifically when it came here. This is one of those stories where we know a little bit of the story, but there's still some gray area that we have to kind of figure out. Or maybe we'll never know. Who knows? But it did end up here. They did fire it off, I know, in, I think, the 3rd year of the Festival of the Arts, which was held here at the museum and over in Yawkey Park. They fired it off to open it up. And I think the 3rd and 4th years they did that. So that was the opening to the Festival of the Arts, was to shoot the cannon. In the 70s, this was actually as part of the bicentennial celebration, American Bicentennial. Let me get the names here. Jeffrey Schmitz, Todd Udiker, and Timothy Udiker, they kind of made it their project in 1976 to restore it. So they restored the cannon. They built the chassis here, which is what we use ever since. They fired it a few times as part of that, I think, notably for the Kiddie Parade opening up, which seems kind of a strange decision, but hey, yeah, I guess. Kids probably enjoyed it. They also shot it over the next couple decades, the Beautification Week, when they opened up with that, again, another strange decision. This is a celebration of putting some flowers together and painting your house, and, let's shoot a cannon to open it up, but that's what they did. They also shot it off for Logjam, which makes a little bit more sense. So opening up a Logjam, let's shoot the cannon. We don't shoot it that much anymore, and there's a very good reason for that. We can't get it out of this building. So originally it was over at the Yawkey House Museum, that's when we had. When we got this building, the Woodson History Center, we brought it in here to this area here, which is our storage. And then they finished the renovation and they put a door on that this no longer fits out of. So, if we really, really wanted to, we could get it out, but it would be a pain. So we just kind of keep it here. So that's kind of why it's here. One of a lot of objects, things that have been donated to us over the years, which are really cool, but unfortunately their size makes it really difficult. Like, same thing with Sir Seven. At least he's kind of mobile. He at least doesn't take up too much of a footprint. This takes up a big footprint. So, for example, when we were doing the exhibit, right, that we currently have, we thought about it. This is one of those objects that people really love seeing and have a fond memory of, but it just took too much dang room up. You know, we couldn't really figure it out. And again, a lot of floor space that it covers. For the space that this would take up, we could put a bunch of other objects that would also have a lot of significance and be able to tell more stories. So we decided, okay, we'll put the suit of armor, we'll put the squirrel. Yeah, squirrel is the other one that people ask about. Maybe not the cannon. And so that's what we did. But it is still here. We still have it. And that's the story of Machetes Cannon. I think that covered everything. Yeah. Ooh. Yeah. Didn't think about that.
I should have gotten you a D-pad.
All right, so there you go. There's two stories from the exhibit. One of an object that made it in, one that didn't. Both the cannon and the knight, both very well-received objects that we have, and that people remember from days gone by. And occasionally we do get asked about both of them. Of course, the thing that we get asked most about, if we still have the thing, is actually this. This did make it into the exhibit as well, but I'm not going to show it to you. You have to come in to see it for yourself. Yeah, you should do that. Anyway, there's not a whole lot more to say about this. This is a mummified squirrel. It is interesting to look at, and not everybody likes it, so I'm not going to show it to you here. Again, you can come on and see it for yourself if you want to. Story's pretty much right here. Not too much more to say about that. But why not end it? This is probably the thing that people most remember, so still do have the squirrel as well, if you were wondering. Yeah, so that's History Chats this week. Wanted to kind of take the opportunity to shoot this kind of, got some ideas to do these sort of pre-shot videos instead of the live program. We'll be back next week with a live program of some local history. But yeah, hopefully in the meantime you enjoyed this. Thanks for watching. Yeah, we'll see you next Thursday for some more History Chats.